Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving right into something you're probably looking at this very second. We are pulling back the curtain on the hidden chemistry of glass. It's a seemingly simple material that literally surrounds us every single day. But as we're going to see, it is actually a highly tunable scientific marvel. We're going to explore exactly how chemists manipulate its fundamental structure to change its state, its color, and its strength. So, let's kick things off by challenging something you probably take for granted. What state of matter is the device screen you're looking at right now? I mean, is it a solid? Is it a liquid? Maybe a solution? It's one of the oldest engineered materials on the planet, yet this one basic question still trips people up. All right, first things first, we've got to bust a really famous myth. You might have heard that old cathedral stained glass windows are thicker at the bottom because the glass somehow flows downward over the centuries like a true liquid. Not true at all. Monks weren't dealing with melting windows. That's just a quirky result of how historic crown glass was manufactured. At room temperature, any flow in glass is completely immeasurable on human timescales. And it's definitely not a true solution in the kitchen chemistry sense either. Once it forms, nothing inside it can freely diffuse or separate out the way, say, sugar does in a glass of water.
So, what exactly is it then? Well, scientists universally classify glass as an amorphous solid. That basically means it's a rigid material that holds a fixed shape, but crucially, it completely lacks a repeating, long-range periodic lattice. You know, that neat, organized atomic structure you'd find in a normal crystal like quartz or salt. Instead, glass forms when a molten mix cools down so incredibly fast that it passes right through a supercooled liquid stage. It just freezes before its atoms even have the time to organize into any kind of neat, repeating pattern.
Materials scientist John Morrow actually hits the nail on the head here. He describes it as a non-equilibrium, non-crystalline state of matter. Basically, down on an atomic scale, the silicon and oxygen atoms are frozen in this continuous, disordered, random network. So it behaves exactly like a solid for all our practical, everyday purposes, yet structurally, it's kind of trapped in a weird limbo somewhere between a solid and a liquid. Moving right along to Section 1, the chemistry of color, tuning the spectrum. Now that we know glass is essentially this frozen, disordered network, let's look at how chemists actually tune that network to create brilliant colors. Because, fun fact, perfectly pure silica glass is actually completely transparent. So how do we get all those amazing colors? The go-to method glassmakers use is called ionic coloring. By adding transition metals, like cobalt for instance, their electron orbital energy levels actually split. They start absorbing specific wavelengths of light to let electrons jump to higher energy levels, and the color that we end up seeing is just what's left over. That cobalt, it leaves us with a stunning deep blue. And it's an incredibly strong colorant, doing all that work at just a few parts per million. Dialing in the exact hue is pretty much like perfecting a complex recipe, and it's heavily dependent on the metal's oxidation state. Take iron and copper as a comparison. Iron, which is a super common impurity in raw sand, produces a blue-green or yellow-brown tint depending on the ratio of its oxidation states. Copper, on the other hand, is wild. It can shift from completely colorless to bright turquoise blue or even to a deep red if it forms a metallic colloid. And all of that just depends on the furnace atmosphere during melting. Think about a standard brown beer bottle for a second. That classic amber brown is a very intentional chemical recipe. It's a precise mix of sulfur, iron, and carbon. And they don't just choose that for the aesthetic. That specific atomic combination is incredibly effective at blocking UV light to protect whatever drink is inside. But hey, it's not all just about individual ions. Glassmakers have a few other tricks up their sleeves. Beyond ionic coloring, they can use something called colloidal coloring. This is where they grow tiny nanometer-sized metal particles, like actual gold, inside the glass after it cools to create this rich cranberry or ruby red. And finally, there's structural coloring. They uses pure physics to scatter light, kind of like the Tyndall effect, creating a milky, iridescent glow. It's actually the exact same physics that makes the sky look blue. Which brings us to Section 2, Hacking the Glass Network, Recipes for Reality. Because changing the color, that's really just the tip of the iceberg. By adding different oxides, chemists can completely rewrite the structural recipe of the glass backbone to change how it behaves in the real world. Let's look at the absolute most common type out there, soda-lime glass. By adding network modifiers, specifically soda and lime, the primary silicon-oxygen bonds in the glass are literally broken down. This depolymerization drastically lowers the melting point and the viscosity. The result? It becomes incredibly cheap and super easy to mass-produce the glass used in your everyday house windows and drinking bottles.
Now, what if we tweak the recipe a bit? If we use boron as a co-network former instead of just breaking bonds down, we create borosilicate glass. You probably know this stuff as Pyrex. Thanks to this specific chemical backbone, it has a wonderfully low thermal expansion. That means it strongly resists shattering when it's rapidly heated or cooled, makes it absolutely perfect for science labware or, those glass measuring cups in your kitchen.
And what about the phone in your pocket? That screen is made of aluminosilicate glass. It's intentionally engineered with aluminum oxide to create a highly specialized network structure designed specifically to accept large ions. And that precise chemical characteristic, it brings us perfectly to our next topic, how we give this glass its unbelievable strength.
That takes us to Section 3. Heating, cooling, and strengthening. Forging the shield. Because to survive being dropped on the sidewalk, tapped thousands of times, and subjected to massive thermal shocks, this chemical network has to be seriously fortified.
One of the primary ways we toughen up glass is thermal tempering. Picture this process. A hot sheet of glass is rapidly quenched, basically blasted with freezing cold air jets. Because the outer surface cools and shrinks first, while the fluid interior remains hot, a crazy battle of physics kicks off. When the inside finally cools and tries to shrink, it's held back by that already rigid outer skin. This permanently freezes a massive compressive stress into the surface. It's exactly why car windows are so strong, and why, if they do break, they completely shatter into small, blunt, relatively safe fragments instead of deadly, jagged shards.
But here's the catch. For really thin, delicate, oddly shaped items, like the smartphone screen we all dread dropping, thermal tempering just doesn't work evenly enough. To solve this, manufacturers rely on an absolutely brilliant chemical hack called ion exchange. Here's the rundown on how that chemical hack works. Manufacturers take that specialized aluminosilicate glass we talked about, and they submerge it in a bath of molten potassium salt at a few hundred degrees Celsius. When they do this, the smaller sodium ions already sitting in the glass's surface naturally diffuse out into the bath. And in their place, much larger potassium ions squeeze into those newly empty spaces. Because those bigger potassium ions are literally being jammed into spaces sized for sodium, it generates a microscopic armor of massive compressive stress, without needing any extreme cooling at all. This is the exact chemistry behind major brands like Gorilla Glass.
All right, final section. Section 4. The future of glass. From lasers to living bone. Because with this level of extreme structural and chemical tunability, glass is definitely not just for windows and cups anymore. It is the invisible backbone of cutting-edge modern technology.
Just think about some of these next-gen applications. Take photochromic glass. By embedding silver halide compounds directly into the network, the glass actually reacts to UV light by forming opaque silver clusters. That's what gives us light-adaptive sunglasses that darken outside and turn clear indoors. Or take glass ceramics. By intentionally coaxing billions of nanoscale crystals to grow inside the glass, scientists can create materials where the expansion of the glass and the contraction of the crystals perfectly cancel each other out. The result? Things like giant telescope mirrors that literally have a thermal expansion coefficient close to zero.
And the functional applications are pushing even further. By doping the glass network with rare earth elements like erbium or neodymium, we embed narrow light emission properties that enable the lasers literally powering global internet fiber optics. But even more mind-blowing? By engineering the glass with calcium and phosphate, we create bioactive glass. Once implanted, this glass reacts with bodily fluids to actually grow a layer similar to bone mineral, bonding directly with living human bone.
Honestly, very few materials on Earth give chemists this much freedom to redesign a single everyday substance from the ground up. We can change its color with just a few parts per million, swap out its surface ions to build microscopic armor, or even teach it to bond with the human body. So the next time you look through a window, take a second to ask yourself, are you really just seeing a simple solid? Or are you staring straight through a non-equilibrium frozen liquid? Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.